Fernando Alonso couldn't save them, Adrian Newey couldn't save them either. Aston Martin have become the worst team in the modern history of Formula 1. Today, I'll be guiding you through all the events chronologically, so we all can understand how cool things have gone so horribly wrong for them. January 2020. It all starts with Lawrence Stroll, father of the driver Lance Stroll, buying a 16.7% stake in the company Aston Martin, which will later on result in the rebranding of Racing Point F1 team into the Aston Martin Formula 1 team for the 2021 season. Before going any further with Aston Martin, we gotta talk about their partner in crime, the Japanese brand providing their engines, Honda. For now, these two will be parallel stories, but don't worry, they'll soon be joining. October 2020, Honda was still providing engines to both Red Bull and their junior team, Toro Rosso, but they announced that at the end of the 2021 season, they wouldn't be continuing in F1 as an engine partner. That meant they either entirely shut down or at the very least heavily downsized the Formula 1 part of their Sakura HRD factory, which is Honda's primary research and development center for Formula 1 in Japan. They moved both their employees and their efforts to focus on more street-relevant car technology, which at the end of the day is the main objective of almost every car manufacturer involved in Formula 1, selling more cars. The F1 engines weren't in line with the carbon neutrality goals set by the Japanese brand, so they were going to withdraw from the championship altogether. However, they were committed to doing their best until the very end. Now we are in 2021, and their best is exactly what Honda did, bringing forward a power unit designed for 2022, a much more reliable and competitive unit which helped Max Verstappen achieve his first Formula 1 driver title. That way, in 2021, Honda became the first engine manufacturer to beat Mercedes to a world championship since the turbo hybrid era began back in 2014, 7 years later. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. 2021 was also the first year of Aston Martin in the Formula 1 grid, starting with Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel as their drivers and partnering with Mercedes as their engine supplier. The four-time world champion joining their team was a statement move by Aston Martin, saying, "Hey, we're here and this is for real. We're going all in Formula 1. But it meant the Mexican Sergio Perez was left without a team momentarily, even with how much he had fought to keep the team alive in their transition from Force India to Racing Point. But I'd say things turned alright for him, since he basically joined Red Bull immediately after being left without a seat at Racing Point or Aston Martin. Now that we all understand the context and who our main protagonists are, things will start to move a bit quicker in this video. February 2021, the FIA meets all 10 teams and they all agree to implement an engine freeze from the 2022 season onwards. In practice, that meant teams could only use previously homologated parts for their engines, but they could still implement some minor tweaks, especially when it came to cost saving and reliability. This engine freeze was key for Red Bull because it meant they could still use the Honda engines even after the Japanese brand left Formula 1 after 2021. That's why they were the main team pushing for the engine freeze to come for the 2022 season. At the same time, Red Bull created Red Bull Powertrains. As the name suggests, it was designed to maintain and create their own engines without having to rely on any other team, as they were doing ever since they started in Formula 1 back in 2005. And Red Bull Powertrains absorbed everything Honda had at Milton Keynes, even their workers and their building. Now it's January 2022 and Honda continued to manufacture, supply and support the engines for Red Bull. This arrangement, which lasted all throughout the 2022 season, saw their engines being rebranded as Red Bull Powertrains, and it lasted throughout the entirety of the 2022 season and then was extended until the end of 2025. The engines were Honda engines rebranded as Red Bull Powertrains, and the agreement basically lasted throughout the entirety of the ground effect era. At this point in time, there were some key personnel who left the Honda project, apart from the workers in the Milton Keynes building. Masashi Yamamoto, who was the person in charge, was signed by Red Bull Powertrains to become a consultant, and Yasuaki Asaki retired at the end of the 2023 season. Not everyone left though. The technical director Toyohiro Tanabe remained involved, leading the engineers working in the 2026 design. We're still in July 2022 when the German Sebastian Vettel announced his retirement from Formula 1. August 2022, the new engine regulations were approved, and unfortunately, because we're living in them, we already know what they entailed. They were still V6 engines with a 50-50 power split between the internal combustion engine and the electrical power, and a cost cap implemented only exclusively for the engines from the 2023 season onwards. Spoiler alert, that means Honda, since coming back to Formula 1, have always been working under that cost cap, unlike the other engine manufacturers. And none other than Fernando Alonso was announced as Sebastian Vettel's replacement. Aston was willing to give the Spaniard a 2-year deal, which Alpine just wasn't. Of course, after that, Alpine announced Oscar Piastri as the replacement for Fernando Alonso, Oscar Piastri, who was part of their driver development program. And that's when Piastri made that famous tweet. Good times overall with the silly season drama. December 2022, 1 year and 2 months later, Honda decides to go back on its decision and continue in Formula 1. But Red Bull, set on the path of independence they chose, and after signing hundreds of employees, not only the ones from Honda in the Milton Keynes building, but also hundreds of employees mainly from Mercedes, decided they were not going to bother any further with Honda. And now we jump to February 2023, when the alliance between Red Bull Powertrains and Ford was announced. Ford mainly involved with Red Bull to help them with the electrical side of the engine. Battery cell technology, the electric motor itself, control software and analytics within the power unit. Amongst other factors, Red Bull Powertrains not being a direct rival in street car manufacturing for Ford was key on deciding for them on the deal. May 2023, this is where finally both stories collide. Aston Martin announced they will be running Honda engines from the 2026 season onwards. Them and only them. It was an exclusive deal. And speaking about deals, why don't we make one right now? You go and subscribe to my channel, and in exchange, you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Pretty fair, right? While you were busy subscribing to my channel, we got to July 2023. Every great team needs a base of operations. So Aston Martin inaugurated the building 1 of their headquarters, building from which the subsequent ones will grow. September 2023, Honda admitted to some difficulties at the moment of coming back to Formula 1. They basically had to rebuild their entire program. But HRC leader Koji Watanabe said, "We don't think we have lost much." And HRC's Formula 1 project leader Tetsushi Kakuda said resources, meaning human resources, were the most difficult point for us. But they were apparently getting bigger resources. We have to solve our less resources problem. That is a big challenge for us. And later on we'll see how this whole human resources problem was key on the debacle of Formula 1 and Honda. February 2024, Honda announces HRC UK, a British division who will help Aston Martin from the 2026 season onwards. And it is located at the old Red Bull Powertrains building, and Red Bull moved Red Bull Powertrains to be closer to their main buildings. So, if I'm correct, and perhaps someone who lives nearby and has seen the building can certify it is, the building was first Honda's when they were partnered with Red Bull, then Red Bull bought it and established Red Bull Powertrains there, and then Honda, coming back to Formula 1 with Aston Martin, bought it back. July 2024, Building 2 of Aston Martin's headquarters is finished. Among other things, it houses the simulator. And the construction of their new wind tunnel was finished during this month as well. Just the construction though. Its calibration, software integration, and everything else the wind tunnel needs to be used in real car development was still to come. October 2024, Andy Cowell replaces Martin Witzmarsh as Aston Martin's CEO. November 2024, after Andy Cowell visited the factory of Honda back in Japan, the one located at Sakura, he said the following: "I saw their test facilities and their work, and I was blown away. They're hungry for development and innovation, very determined and proud." Small disclaimer, I found the quote in Spanish, so it probably ain't word for word what he said, but we all get the idea. The guy was really impressed with the factory. January 2025, Andy Cowell replaces Mike Crack as Aston Martin's team principal. Sorry, I cannot say that name without laughing. And the aero ban on 2026 components is lifted, meaning teams can now officially test their 2026 aerodynamic components, which will be used for the 2026 season. March 2025, Adrian Newey joins the team as managing technical partner and as a shareholder, being the first time Adrian Newey becomes a shareholder in a team. And their wind tunnel is finally available for use, just 9 months before the 2026 season starts. April 2025. This is the moment where Adrian Newey later on admits they were first able to get a model of their 2026 car in their wind tunnel, 4 months behind any other team, who probably started testing theirs as soon as the ban was lifted, meaning January 2025. And it's not as if they needed the new wind tunnel, they could have just used the model in the one they were using previously, but they just didn't have the model ready. May 2025, Adrian Newey discovers a correlation error between real life and their simulator, who is located at Building 2, and it makes the simulator basically useless. This is a problem that will take them at least a few years to correct. August 2025, Enrico Cardile, ex-Ferrari, joins Aston Martin as Chief Technical Officer. October 2025, Andy Cowell travels once again to the Honda factory in Sakura, where all 4 major pieces of the puzzle meet: Aston Martin, Honda, Aramco, and Valvoline, the latter 2 being the fuel and lubricant suppliers. What exactly were Honda showing poor Andy Cowell there in those visits? I don't really know, because the guy always seemed so happy after coming back. Perhaps it was like one of those North Korea tours where they only show you the good stuff. That would be the only explanation possible. November 2025. Amidst all the rumors of Honda having troubles with their engines, both Lawrence Stroll and Adrian Newey go alongside Andy Cowell to Japan. Apparently, that's the moment where they discover only 30% of Honda's original workers were still working on the Formula 1 project. The other 70% left are all rookies. While there, they also discover the Honda engine is underpowered on all of its many issues. So Andy Cowell is sent to work with Honda at Japan, and Adrian Newey himself replaces him as team principal. And that's how we got to the beginning of 2026. All the build-up, all the hype with the signing of Newey, all the engineers from Mercedes, Fernando Alonso coming to the team, the state-of-the-art facilities, it all amounted to absolutely nothing. A car who after 4 races, its best qualifying finish is a P17, and in the race is a P15. Incredibly far off the pace of even the midfield teams and fighting with Cadillac, a brand new team. And that's where they are even able to finish a race, because the vibrations are so bad they physically hurt the drivers. It was first during testing where we all could see just how awfully that car drives, and then we could corroborate it during the first Grand Prix. During Australia, both Adrian Newey and Koji Watanabe sat down for an interview where most of the blame was put on Honda's side, mainly for the engine issues we are all familiar with right now: reliability, speed, and those damn vibrations. But of course, Aston Martin also deserves a huge part of the blame, because how incompetent must you be to not realize Honda is struggling this much for literally years, and after visiting their factory multiple times. And that's without even factoring in the simulator issues or the delay testing a 2026 model, which fall exclusively under Aston Martin. So to sum everything up, in Honda's side, they basically dismantled their entire Formula 1 operation just to come back 1 year and 2 months later, when they had cost cap limitations, limiting the amount of money they could spend developing that engine, which some of the teams didn't have for some time. And with a team full of rookies, since most of their other engineers were distributed to mass production projects. And somehow, Aston Martin didn't realize all of that was happening at Honda, and despite those big name signings, their facilities brought them down. And the main victim in all of this ridicule, because there's no other word for it, is Fernando Alonso. If I had a nickel every time Alonso was screwed by a Honda engine, I'd had two, which is absurd. Between Aston Martin and Honda, they've wasted Fernando Alonso's final years in Formula 1. It's a miracle if we even see him in a podium ever again. On the bright side, for Aston Martin and Honda, in these new regulations there's a system called a DUO, Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities, a support system which is activated when a power unit is or becomes significantly less competitive than the rest. There's a bunch of different tiers and small changes between them, but overall, to simplify it, the worse your engine is, the more benefits you get. And in the case of Honda, which is what we are concerned about here, being 10% slower than Mercedes will grant them $90 million and more testing hours, 230 to be more precise. If the information from the race is accurate, which I don't see any reason not to believe them, they'll be granted these benefits from the Canadian Grand Prix onwards. To close off, and on more personal terms, I feel like this partnership between Honda and Aston Martin is bound to succeed at some point. Perhaps their facilities aren't working as intended right now, but they will in the future, for sure. And Honda has proved to us that with enough time and patience in them, they can build an engine capable of winning the Formula 1 world title. Just biting the bullet and sticking with each other, it's probably the best course of action. Or at least that's what I believe. It probably won't be during this regulations era, but at some point they will be at the top of the pole. If you got a different opinion, you can let me know in the comments down below. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching the video. Big thank you to Victor Abad, who made a timeline on Twitter, and it was the backbone to making this video a reality. Until next time.